Union and the Euro-Atlantic community as a whole has been very determined and united in terms of our reactions to those atrocities that are happening in Ukraine. We welcome, of course, unprecedented huge number of sanctions that have already been imposed. At the same time, I think we believe that half measures are not going to work, as they have not worked in previous times. We see that there's much more potential that the West can employ in terms of having Russia to rethink what they're doing. On the latest move, we hope that the sanctions will be as robust as possible. And of course, we would like to see more sanctions in terms of ending energy imports from Russia.
Yes.
And that means that coal is good, but it might not be enough.
Yes.
We need to think of oil and gas. And in that context, Lithuania has made its move already, and we have introduced the ban for Russian gas already a few days ago.
And you were the first, I think, to do that in the European Union. And we'll hear the European Union's plans. But Germany, it is said, has been pressing for a phased-in ban on Russian coal. And they have not been supportive of a ban on gas or oil at this stage. What are your thoughts on that? Is Germany, from your point of view, simply being too cautious?
On the one hand, we understand the cautiousness when it comes to each country's national decisions, because they are based on a number of criteria and number of considerations. At the same time, I think if we really want it, it is possible to move faster and stronger. And I think one has to see the bigger picture here. Are we paying now the price? Of course, there is a price for sanctioning Russia, but wouldn't it be the price much bigger if we don't do it now, but we'll have to do it in a month or in two, if Russia continues to move on and continues to penetrate, not only Ukraine but also beyond Ukraine. That would be enormous cost.
But let me put the German argument to you, which you'll know very well, which is the German economy is still very heavily dependent on Russian gas, something like 40% of its supply, and to cut that supply would seriously damage German industry, German jobs, and that, for among other reasons, is why they say, look, we have to be very cautious.
We understand the cautiousness, and we respect that. At the same time, we need to move faster and to move more resolutely in imposing those sanctions. Obviously, there will be a price, but as we are seeing, the more we stay cautious, the more we still have to do at the later stage at the cost of human lives.
Now, what about military support then? I mean, there is a supply of weapons to Ukraine from European Union countries, including yours. What more should be done? There's been a debate, of course, about such things as the supply of fighter aircraft, let alone air cover. How far should NATO go? How far do you want to go?
We believe that we need to go as far as Ukraine is requesting when it comes to military equipment and defensive weapons. We have to do everything we can. Each country has the capacity to do it. Some countries have more capabilities, other countries maybe less capabilities.
Yes.
We have done, in our national sense, we have done the maximum we could, and we will continue to do that. But at the same time, we have to be very wary of our own defense situation, because we are not that far from the border of Belarus. I mean, we have the border of Belarus and border with Kaliningrad.
Yes.
But more military support to Ukraine before Russia launches new offensive. That would be the key word and key consideration that we would be trying to convey to our partners and allies.
And does military engagement, would that include NATO involvement over Ukrainian airspace or on Ukrainian soil with a no-fly zone, for example, or military escort for humanitarian aid? Would you go that far?
Well, I think when it comes to military escort for humanitarian reasons, I think we should be doing more. When it comes to no-fly zone, I think it is a little bit more difficult because you would need to have appropriate measures in place
Yes.
to do that. And I think instead of really focusing and debating that consideration, we would very much support any NATO country's decision to provide more lethal weapons to
Yes.
Ukraine to help them defend themselves, be it tanks or anti-aircraft, anti-missile equipment that some countries in NATO have the possession of.
Yes.
And we are happy to see that the UK has been stepping up, and there are plans to support continuously Ukraine. And I think it is a critical juncture at the moment, because the Russian forces have been pulled out because of Ukrainian resistance from Kiev area. And I think there's a good opportune moment now to give Ukraine maximum support they need militarily, so that they could continue this trend.
Yes.
Because
yes.
Russia seems to be not pulling out because they want to pull out, but rather because Ukrainian resistance is so stiff and so resolute.
Yes.
So we need to give everything them before Russian state launches new offensive.
Now, there are some in Europe and the West who worry that supplying offensive weapons, like battle tanks, for example, that could provoke Putin into an escalation. So that escorting humanitarian aid could expose NATO forces to the risk of Russian attack, and that could lead to escalation. If there was an escalation in this war, then your country, Lithuania, would be on the front line, would be arguably at greater risk of Russian aggression. Does that concern you?
We are concerned of what's going on. And I think the actions that have been taken by Putin's Russia have not been provoked. They took their own decision, which God knows why they do that. But I think whether we provoke or not provoke, I think they would continue doing if we don't stop them together with Ukraine. And Ukraine is doing miraculous things. They are fighting for our freedom. We need to support them by providing any arms that they need at the moment. We are ready to face Russian aggression if it were to incur in our territory. And we are quite resolute in terms of will. And at the same time, we're working in NATO with NATO allies together to make sure that this would not happen. What we need now in our country, to reflect on your last point, is deterrence by denial. Deterrence by punishment would not work in our case, and we see it has not worked in Ukraine so far. Yeah. Denial. We need to deny Russia to make all those insane moves.
Yes. Well, I mean, insane maybe a part of the argument, because there are those who argue, of course, as you know, that if Putin was provoked to the extent of threatening Lithuanian territory, say, a member of NATO, that would lead to World War III.
Well, let's face the bigger picture. We are at war, or Russia is at war with the West, with our Euro-Atlantic alliance already. And we have to make sure that we will do everything to stop them. Because if Putinism is not stopped, then they will recover and they will wage further attacks on any country, any democratic country. So that is why Lithuanian government is adamantly actively engaged in all the consensus building. Obviously, we need consensus. We need to stick together. We need to be united. And that's why it's a delicate action that we all are in right now.
Yes. I mean, in Lithuania, you have expelled the Russian ambassador. Should the rest of the European Union, should the United Kingdom do the same? Are these other countries being timid in this respect?
Well, we've seen that many countries have done quite bold steps already in terms of isolating the Russian Federation. They have expelled the agents under cover as diplomats. We took a decision to lower the level of diplomatic representation with the Russian Federation, and the ambassador of Russia to Lithuania will have to leave the country.
Yes.
And given the overall unconstructive role of the Russian diplomatic service, our government also decided to close the consulate general in Klaipėda, in our port city, in relation to the aggression against Ukraine. I think this action is meant to be our policy and our action to support the isolation of the Putin's Russia. Obviously, our ambassador in Moscow will return to Lithuania in the nearest future. Whether the other countries will take similar decisions, it's up to them. We just set the example that, as from our national interests, as it looks like to be the most appropriate decision to be taken in these circumstances.
Your aim, as so many other countries in NATO, in Europe, and in the West, is to see the defeat of Russia in this conflict. For you, what does victory look like? What does it mean? Does it mean the expulsion of all Russian forces from Ukraine and Crimea and the Donbass? You define for me, if you could, victory.
I think we need to see that the Russian Federation takes actions that would lead to, first of all, stopping those atrocities that are taking place, retrieving from territorially integral Ukraine. And also, I think we need to see more things happen that relates to previous occupations, be it in Georgia or in Moldova, or obviously Ukrainian Crimea. So all this needs to happen in order to see that we could come back to a type of civilized negotiations or whatever it could be. Because now, from speaking to the Russian Federation, having a gun pointed at all of us absolutely doesn't work from our perspective. So these steps need to happen. And before that happens, we don't see any prospect of negotiating or being at the table with Russian government.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for having me.